All right, hey, welcome back. We got part two for you now. So in this section of the extreme ownership muster recap by Aide De Camp, we're going to be talking about iterative decision making, detachment being a superpower, accountability, planning, strategic versus tactical thinking, the power of relationships, and training. So to start here, we're going to talk about the OODA loop around iterative decision making. So the OODA loop was developed by a famous pilot, and it's basically like him taking like his like problem solving like methodology and like kind of like defining it and putting it into terms that allowed other people to like interact with and learn from. So this is actually like commonly used in the military and yeah, so OODA loops. OODA stands for. It's an acronym that stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. And so, I think the key takeaways here is like just. I mean, you can see the notes on the slide that talk about what each one of these kind of phases look like, but they all kind of feed back into each other and feed back into observe. So, like as you're interacting with things, you're making decisions and moving forward and acting, like all of that stuff's kind of feeding back in. So it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier in terms of like not needing all the information to move forward. Like using something like OODA loop allows you to take incremental steps forward while you're feeding, like taking inputs from what you're experiencing into your future decision making and action. So
Yeah, I like the way that Jocko and the team kind of broke down each of the four categories of the OODA loop into really easy terms for everyone to understand. Observe is information intake. What do you see, hear, feel? What's the competition doing? It's all just information in. Uh, Orient is analyzing where are you? Where are your teammates? Are your sources reliable? Are they trustworthy? Are you biased? What does your experience tell you? When you're making the decision, what are you going to do? One of my favorite things that they said was don't say guess. Like, I've gone through observe and orient, and I guess we're going to do this. It's extreme ownership academy, right? Own the decision, and then think about how quickly can you communicate it to the team, and then act as execute. And it's a hypothesis. A lot of times you're not guaranteed to get it right. You test that hypothesis, and like Jeff said, it's a loop. So when you if the your act is wrong, if the decision is wrong, now you get to go back into observe with even more feedback and information that you didn't have before you started.
Yeah, and I think Jocko said that step zero in this is to detach, which we have an entire slide on it. But it's like you said, taking out the emotion before you even get this going. That way, you're removing that aspect of it, and also just not getting stuck. Like you don't want to get all the data. Like you don't want to wait for all that. So you observe as long as you can, but then you have to take the next step, orient, make a decision, act, and then, like I said earlier, you're not always going to make the right decision. So that's why it's a loop.
yeah, and so also kind of in this section of the muster, they talked about like their own like extreme ownership, like their leadership loop, and how, which really combines the laws of combat and the mindset for victory that we discussed in the previous part. Like it combines all of those things, but it's key to like um, helping you identify and solve like root causes of problems. And so whether it's using OODA loop or the leadership loop, like these are all meant to be like kind of practical ways to work through problems, to solve things and to make progress, to take action. So yeah, in extreme ownership, they talk about it a lot. In that, the next slide is on detachment, but it's take a step back, take a deep breath, look around, make a call. And that's what all of this is really kind of focused on, simply. So
Yeah, and something that Jocko said during that was, where does this fail? Where does this loop not work? And it's when we get stuck on one of the phases, we deny some of the feedback, and a lot of time that's based off of ego. We're either unwilling to say, I don't know, I have the answer here. I need help, or I need more information, or it's all really just uh, our ego that hangs us up. We're afraid to say that idea is better than mine. And those are the things that's just like a dead stop to this loop.
For sure. So we've talked a lot about detachment. Let's go ahead and get into the slide that explains it even further. So, yeah, one of the big like takeaways that I took when they were talking about detachment being a superpower is like when you make emotional decisions, or when you make decisions when you're emotional, they oftentimes lead to irrational solutions. So when our decisions or any step within that OODA loop, like if it's influenced by emotion, by ego, you're going to get irrational outputs from that. And so it's important to understand like in yourself to see in yourself like where your emotions start to creep in and deflect against that as much as possible. So
yeah, I think it's detachment's not easy, right? It says it's a superpower. It's simple, but it's not easy. You have to train, you have to practice, you have to train yourself to be able to do it. And check your ego is another big part of it. And that really, I've told y'all, the ego was a huge thing for me. That my biggest takeaway from this whole muster, because it ties into everything you're doing, and it's pretty much the can be the fault in any of these where they don't work. Generally, the closer you are to the goal, to a person, to a problem, the more difficult it is to detach. And knowing that really helps you train and practice detachment.
Yeah, I think they talked about detaching from your ego, your emotions, but also your perspective. I think we can do a lot better job of looking at it from our customer's perspective or our vendor's perspective and dealing with problems from that point of view. I think we're going to get maybe a better solution, maybe not always a better solution, but we're going to get a solution that is going to have a better effect on business and future business.
yeah, and I think so many times like so looking at like these competing priorities, we've talked about ego, we've talked about listening, but like in terms of asking questions, they were specific, intentional about including the word earnest, because you're not asking questions in a way like, oh, I already know the answer to them. Like you're asking them because you sincerely want to hear somebody else's opinion on what they think, or what they how they feel like we should move forward, or what direction we should go. Like you're asking them in an earnest way because you want to understand their perspective. So yeah, again, detachments, like it says on the side, it's a superpower. But when we're able to like step back and take more of like a bird's eye view at the problem, instead of like looking down the proverbial scope of our weapon or whatever, that's an analogy they use a lot. But if we can step back from that narrow focus and look at the whole problem, like oftentimes we're going to get better solutions out of that. So,
and I think they also mentioned that like by doing this, by detaching, that you're going to make a decision that's the right decision and not the decision that you just want to do.
Yeah. And so often this like comes into play when we're talking about problems that are like cross-departmental problems. And it's like it's easy for a leader to look at something like, oh, well, I'm only looking at this problem through the lens of my team, and if I'm solving it just from that perspective, like it may not be what's best for the entire org. If I'm only making decisions about what's best for my specific unit or my specific focus, like it may not be the best solution for the company. And so the detaching, like that's a real world, like in our business application of detachment, is being able to take a step back and look around. Hey, I've got this problem on this project, and it's being influenced by project management, by production, by design, by construction. Like, how do we solve this? Well, if I'm only looking at it through one of those lenses, like it may not be the best solution. We got to kind of step back and look and see what makes the most sense for all departments involved,
Exactly.
In our business, it's like even more important, more critical because of how collaborative our processes are. This is something that I talk about a lot, but like the level of collaboration that happens within our business for there to be success on a project, it creates a lot of opportunity for people to have like kind of a narrow focus on just their piece of it. And as often as we can, we need to be kind of thinking and considerate of like, well, what's happening upstream from me? What's happening downstream from me? Like, how can I fit into that the best,
And in the first unit, we during Leadership is the Solution, we talked about being leaders in business, but also leaders in life. And like detachment is a great tool in our personal lives too. Learn to solve problems and detach from I mean, we get emotion involved in stuff at work, but it's, you know, threefold with problems we have in our personal life or more, right? You're naturally more emotional to it, and being able to detach helps us be leaders, not just in business, but in life. It's a great tool.
Absolutely. So the next slide that we have prepared for you guys is around accountability, and I think oftentimes there's like there's just some like misconceptions around what accountability means, and they were very intentional about pointing out like you know the phrase of like I'm gonna hold that person accountable, like I'm gonna make sure that they're accountable for this, like it kind of like speaks to the wrong spirit of that, like of what accountability is. And accountability should be like, you know, like accountability in our business and in life, like should be about like what can I do better, you know, like where did I fail in this? Like holding yourself accountable is like the spirit of like what they were trying to communicate in this section of muster. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. I think they said that this is the essence of extreme ownership, and you know, the one person we always have to hold accountable is ourselves. And when we do talk about holding others accountable, it's still internal. We need to look and say, if I'm going to hold this person accountable, have I communicated what they're being held accountable to? Have I communicated expectations clearly? What specifically am I trying to hold them accountable to? Maybe I failed helping them understand. Maybe the mission wasn't simple enough. There's a lot of areas that you can look internally before you say, I'm going to hold you accountable for this mistake. Where did I not give them the resources they needed?
yeah.
Whatever it is to hold them accountable.
Yep. And really kind of speaks to like our focus as leaders should be providing that clarity, right? So making sure that we're explaining why that our training around that is very clear and concise. It's simple. That we're empowering people within their roles to like make decisions. That's decentralized command, right? And like we're mentoring people when they like, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Like when they mess up, like when they get something wrong, like how do we react to that? Do we hold them accountable? Do we write them up, or do we fill out disciplinary action forms? Are we like harsh and critical to them in our communication, or do we have like more of a mentor or coach mindset and like helping them get better, helping them learn from that experience, and so that they can do better next time, right? So the other thing that I highlighted here is like just tying it back into EOS. I think the 555 is a great accountability tool within EOS. So having 5 core values, 5 roles and responsibilities, and 5 rocks, like it really creates clarity within an individual in our business. The core values obviously are you the right person, right? If you fit our core values, our 5 core values, you're the right person. The 5 roles and responsibilities are about like the right seat. Like if somebody understands, has clarity around what that role requires in terms of responsibilities, like that, and they're able to do those things, like that indicates that they're the right seat. And then the 5 rocks being like we're continuously improving, working on things to not only improve ourselves but improve the business. So having those 5 rocks, I think EOS is generally like 3 to 7 rocks. Like having those 5 rocks is making progress towards objectives, ultimately making progress towards what does winning look like, what are our goals. So
Absolutely.
yep. So the next slide that we have here is planning. So, I mean, there's a lot here in terms of planning. My biggest takeaway from this section was oftentimes like when I'm creating plans, like I'm consistently like thinking about like the risks or the threats to that plan, and I'm making notes of like what are like if this happens, what is my response going to be to it, or what should our response be to it. So like mentally I'm planning for contingencies, but the big takeaway for me here was I rarely like share those in the plan, and so some of where that like can cause like issues in our business is like if I've got all these things thought out, or if I have a lot of contingencies planned out and I'm not sharing them to people, then it's likely that when those things happen, we've got to take time at that point to like stop down and talk about it, versus like I could present that, be more clear about what those contingencies are up front, so that when and if they do occur, like people can just react and go, you know. So that was really my big takeaway from talking about planning.
Yeah, I think that if in regards to planning, if you are like a junior member on your team, always taking the opportunity to step up and be a part of the planning, I think it goes a long way with your leader and giving you the experience to be doing this, and will help you elevate and hopefully like continue moving up the ladder and the opportunity that you're in. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Like anytime we as leaders see an opportunity to assign parts of the plan or the planning to individuals on our team, like it gives them great opportunity to learn and practice their skills, and it takes responsibility off of us to be there, like solving all the problems when they happen, you know.
And the
So
buy-in is usually a lot higher when the team is coming up with the plan rather than it coming just down from leadership. So,
for sure.
Yeah, you may have the skills and ability to create a plan, and you may have enough skills to make that plan succeed. But just like Jeff said, if you're the one that created every bit of it, you're not going to have the buy-in like Nick just talked about, and everyone on that team is going to look to you to solve every issue because you haven't opened it up for anyone else's input. So if there's a problem, you've got to be the one to solve it. And you know, it says here, plan for contingencies, but don't overanalyze every contingency. I wanted to share on this slide this risk analysis matrix. It's a super simple tool that I have used for years, and I know we've used it here in some of our initiatives. But when you're planning for contingencies, it's real easy to get overwhelmed with the amount of things that could happen. But you know, you don't want to spend any time or focus on stuff that is super unlikely to happen, or if it does happen, has a super low impact. So you know, you spend 10 minutes with a team writing down all the contingencies, and then labeling them. How much will they impact this project, and how strong is the likelihood of it happening? And you take the ones that have high impact, high likelihood, and that's where your focus goes.
Yep. Those are probably the contingencies that you actually plan for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Love it. All right, moving on. The next slide is strategic versus tactical thinking, which I think, I'd like to think that most people that have had any prolonged interaction with me have heard these terms come out of my mouth about strategic versus tactical, not just thinking, but actions. Like, what are we involved in on a day-to-day basis? What matters most? What matters least? And the more time as leaders that we can spend thinking about strategic and working on strategic things, like the bigger impact we're going to be able to make on the business, right?
definitely. I really enjoyed the exercise we did there with the other people around us, coming up with things in the business that we're getting tactical wins, but we're not getting the strategic wins, and that's what kind of made me open my eyes, thinking we're really not doing as good as I think we are. Yes, we're getting these wins here, here, and here, but we're having to win a whole bunch of little times, and we're still not getting that big victory. So that was a big eye opener for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's super critical in business and life. A tactical win and a strategic loss. You haven't accomplished anything, not working towards that overall goal.
Yeah, and IDS, if you're looking and finding the actual problem and going through it in EOS, you can get that strategic problem or get it fixed so you can get those strategic wins. I think that's a big part of actually finding the real issue and not fixing the thing that's right there on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when we talk about strategic versus tactical thinking, a lot of this ties back into stuff that we've already talked about in terms of what does winning look like, understanding the why and being focused on the why, not the how, and just hammering home the point that that's what the vision traction organizer in EOS is for, is to create clarity near and long term about where like not just where we're going as a company, but where we're going as a department, as a team, down to the individual level. And so I love again the tie-in to EOS because I think it just reinforces some of the practices, the tools that we're using in our business. So
I really liked that slide. The enemy thanks you for not giving 100% today. It's one of my favorite slides. I feel like we should put one up. It's like Aide De Camp thanks you for not giving 100% today.
Right.
no doubt.
You know, the way this builds off of the previous slides, like especially detachment, when we're talking about detachment and ego, like if you can't learn to detach, if you're not training yourself and practicing detachment, there is no way that you can think strategically 100% of the time. If you can't detach, if you stay too involved in it, like there's no way you're going to be able to look at it strategically. Like that is a precursor to thinking strategically.
Yeah, and I don't want somebody to like interact with this slide and think like, oh, well, it's not acceptable for me to have like no tactical like responsibilities or tasks. Like the important thing to highlight here when we're talking about thinking strategically 100% of the time, like if you have tactical responsibilities, they should be focused towards strategic long-term goals and objectives, right? So it's okay to have tactical responsibilities at any level in our business, but it should be in the effort, like being in an effort towards achieving your long-term mission. So the next slide that we have going here is the power of relationships, and we get to talk a little bit about leadership capital and what does that mean? What's that mean to you, Kevin? What's leadership capital?
Leadership capital was probably one of my favorite parts of the whole muster. When you talk about leadership capital, you think every interaction we have, every conversation, every really interaction is either a deposit or a withdrawal on our leadership capital. If the only time you speak to someone is when you need something from them, don't expect that you're going to get much from them. If every time you are working with your team, you're barking orders at them and yelling at them, like people only accept that for so long. Sometimes there is somebody's about to get hurt or something very critical is happening. You have to bark an order out. And if you haven't built a relationship, if you haven't built up that leadership capital, they need to know that's not usually how he talks to me. Something really important's happened. I need to listen to him right now. But if that's how you talk to people all the time, like you're just withdrawing from your leadership capital and you're never making any deposits.
Yeah, they literally use that analogy that when you hear the term leadership capital, you should think of a bank account and think about deposits and withdrawals. And so if that's the proper analogy, if leadership capital is the bank account, then relationships is the currency, right? And that's so that's the point of this slide, the power of relationships. Like the better you are at building relationships, the more performance, the better execution you're going to get out of the people that you're working with and for. So they even shared like some tips and tactics around like if you have a boss that's a micromanager. Like I'd like to think that we don't have any of those bosses here, but maybe we do. Maybe some people feel that way about their boss. The way that you deal with a boss that you feel like is micromanaging you is by building a better relationship. It's not by complaining about it. It's not by not doing the things that they ask you to do, but it's by building a better relationship with you. Because at the end of the day, like a fundamental aspect of relationship is trust, and that may be the reason why they're micromanaging you is they don't trust you to do it the right way. The better relationship you have, the better you guys are going to operate together, and the less you're going to feel like you're being micromanaged.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence that we do our best work and get the best results on projects with general contractors or clients that we have the best relationships with. So I think they're key internally, externally. Probably the most important thing in work in general is just building relationships with everyone you can, and don't let leadership capital make you think that no matter like where you are on the totem pole means you don't have it, because everyone has it from top to bottom, and you get more of it by having relationships. So someone at the bottom of the totem pole may have more leadership capital than someone at the top just because they've built better relationships.
Yeah, it's not really something you can opt out of. In every interaction, you're either depositing or withdrawing, right? So you need to remember that and think of it. Every interaction you have is an opportunity to make a deposit on your leadership capital for when you need to make a withdrawal on it, right? But
Yeah, and
every interaction you're doing it.
it's funny is I'm sitting here, looking at the final bullet points here around relationship framework, and like just hearing Jocko's voice, and like, oh, you're not getting, like, your boss doesn't trust you. Good. Like, give them trust. Like everything here, if you're like, so these are tactics, these are strategies, right? Like if you don't feel like your boss trusts you, good. Give them trust. Like that's how you get trust, is by trusting somebody. If you don't feel like you're respected by your boss or by your peers, good. Give them respect. Like that's how you get respect. So all of these things, like if you're not being listened to, then it's maybe because you don't listen to people. Like that's the extreme ownership bend on this is, like if you're not getting something, you should give it. And there's a lot of like cliche around that. Probably you could talk about like the golden rule, like treating other people the way you want to be treated. Like this all kind of falls into that stuff that our parents taught us when we were wee little lads, right? So, but yeah, the key here is relationships, right? So they're paramount, they're critical for success, and it can't be overstated, right? So, or understated. I guess it could be overstated, understated. So next slide up is training. Why is training important, Nick?
I think training. I think you should never say no to training. Like, why would you ever say no to getting better? Jocko said that they train for like 12 months before a 6-month deployment as a Navy SEAL. So like for 6 months of work, they have to train 12 months for that work. So I think that hits us on the head, like how important training is.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were some good notes in muster about like what should training be. So training should be realistic. Like you should be creating real world scenarios. Like you shouldn't waste people's time training on things that won't ever happen or occur in their process, in their role. They should be repetitive. Like we should be creating, just like when you exercise or when you learn a new skill, you're creating like a physical skill. You're creating muscle memory. And the more repetition that you get, the more muscle memory you create. And it creates like kind of reflexes. So you don't have to, like when you encounter something, you don't have to stop and think about how should I respond to this. Like you just know from that training. It should be fundamental focus. My note here was this is just like our core processes simplified, like to the very basic, like watered, boiled down level. That's what it should be. And then they should also be stressful. We all made the same note on this slide, which is there's no growth in the comfort zone. And so if you're going through training and it's easy, it's comfortable, then it's not right. It's not good training. So we should create stressful environments within that training so that when people get into their real role, when they're dealing with real world problems in a live action like environment, like they know what to do, and they're not, the training should be harder than what they're going to experience in the real world. So,
and your most experienced leaders should train. Like the most experienced leaders at your company, they should be the ones training people how to be experienced leaders.
Yep.
Should be the ones creating these scenarios or making sure that it's stressful, making sure that it's focused on our fundamentals, realistic, all that. We got to lean on the people that are highly skilled at this to provide training.
For sure. And man, one of the biggest like aspects of this to me, and I think they hit on this in muster, but when I go back to like my like in ROTC, like the field training exercises that we went on, like we'd have like specific missions that we'd go out on, and there's like specific maneuvers that we're supposed to execute on. And we have somebody that's like an upperclassman or like part of the like military cadre that was like following us around. Like they were out there taking notes. But after every exercise that we did, the final step in any training was to do what they called an AAR, or an after action review. So it's like it's not just good enough to do training, but after you've done the training, you come back together and you debrief on what happened. Hey, I saw that in this situation, you went left when you should have went right. Why did you make that decision? What did you see right? And you're helping kind of reinforce not only what they did in training, but like what did they take away from it so that it kind of like cements into like their behaviors, their attitude, that kind of stuff. So I think like having the training is super important, but the last aspect of that is what did you take away from it, is like following up, you know, what did you take away from this? What could you have done better? What do you think you did well? You know, we talk about it in EOS in terms of like what's working, what's not working. Like this oftentimes is, it's a very subtle aspect of training, but I think it's overlooked a lot of times. So,
Yeah.
all right, this kind of wraps up part 2. So again, thanks for staying tuned through this, and we're gonna wrap this up with part 3. So we look forward to seeing you in that unit of the module.